Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode. Today, we're exploring 10 of the most common 3D printing mistakes when it comes to getting started in the world of 3D printing. Are you making any of these mistakes in your current workflow? Did you maybe in the past? Let us know in the comments below what your most common duh moments were in the 3D resin printing world and how maybe you overcame it during your 3D resin printing or 3D printing journey. Anyway, without further ado, we'll cut right into it. And this isn't like a top 10 where we're going to go from 10 to 1. We're actually just going to go in order. And I'm going to start with number 1, not mixing your resins. This doesn't seem like it would be the most common mistake or the number 1 mistake. However, in a lot of people's journey, they simply forget to shake the bottle as vigorously as possible, making sure to combine all the contents. In this case, they're not getting well mixed resin. If the room that was stored in was cold, this is even worse because it causes the resin to get a little thicker and it doesn't flow as well. So if you didn't compensate this in your settings, you're probably going to have a bad print and a bad time. Mixing resins is important. 2, leveling your build plate, either too close, not enough, or just essentially just having a bad level. Now, when it comes to build plates, obviously you've got your hinges here where you fasten these. Now, a lot of people will press this down, and make it as tight as possible. But what I suggest is that you get it down there as tight as possible that you can by hand. And if you feel that there's too much give or whatever on the piece of paper you're using to level your plate, simply adjust it by moving the plate down by 0.1 millimeter at a time and do this until the paper pretty much barely moves. Now, some folks will disagree with me and say that you need a little bit of a gap between your FEP and your build plate that allows some resin to form and doesn't cause too much pressure on the screen. However, I've tried that method and it's only left me with sadness. So try to get your build plate as tight as possible without putting it too close to the glass. And obviously, you don't want to break anything. So that's a big that's a big mistake that people will often make. Not leveling it at all is a really terrible mistake. And a lot of the auto leveling systems that are out there, they either work or they don't, and eventually they're going to fail just like any other piece of equipment. So just keep that in mind. Number 3, not using an air filter or space heater when it gets cold. Now, this is a twofold thing, and you can use little air filters like this one. And these are great because you can just charge them up and take them with you and put them next to the printer. You can put them inside the printer casing if you want. They're very convenient. They last a while. They have a nice little charcoal filter in them. They will do the job. The space heater, and why I listed these things as a double kind of thing, is because some new printers are now coming with things that are both air filters and space heaters kind of in the same combo. The M5S Pro, it actually includes one of these, although I don't agree with it having a air filter heater that blows hot air. My thought with that would have been just a vat heater that sits under the vat, but maybe there's issues with trying to combine all that equipment on top of each other. I don't really know. I'm not an engineer. That's not my specialty. But having a space heater when it gets cold, like a small heater that you can put near your printers, or even a vat heating system modification where you can heat up your vat, I think is important to have something like that to compensate for cold. I mean, I live in Florida and we still get cold here. So, it doesn't get cold enough where anything's going to freeze most of the time, but there have been some late night prints that are going on in the middle of the night. And, I will worry about, the fact that it's dropped at least 30 to 40 degrees below optimal temperature for the resin that I'm using. So that is definitely an important one. The air filter, though, important for your health. Please keep these around your printers because it'll help you not to get, inhale more VOCs. You don't need that. Number 4, not having the right tools for the job. Now, this can be a big mistake because a lot of folks they'll not have clippers. Like maybe you're not a modeler and you don't really work with these. They won't have the proper clippers. You will need these to remove some supports that are a little bit thicker or just have a little bit more going to them. Second most common tool that people don't buy enough of, and they use the ones that come in the printers, are these little guys, flash drives. Please do not use the ones that are included with the printer. They are usually terrible and they don't last very long or work very well. Other tools you're probably going to need are going to be the Allen keys, that you're going to use to take apart almost every component on your printer. Things like gloves, a respirator mask, alcohol, plenty of it, unless you're using water washable resins, in which case you will still need some sort of a cleaning agent with the water. The water works pretty well, but my experience with it is I actually will just mix a little bit of Dawn soap with the water, and it really works well. It actually takes the water washable stuff off really well. But yeah, tools. You may need to make sure you got your tools for the job. Another thing I might recommend, if you're like me and you do a lot of prints and you lay them out on the floor because you just got so many of them, get yourself some knee pads or some soft pads to sit on or kneel on, because you're going to wind up doing a lot of sitting or kneeling on hard surfaces more than likely, depending on where you have your printers. Number 5, using cheap resin. Now, this is a big one, and a lot of folks might argue with me here, but I'm going to just say don't do it. I know that the more expensive stuff is more expensive, and I get it. Times are hard. People don't have a ton of money. I don't have a ton of money to spend on this stuff, but I got to be honest. I won't use anything less than the quality stuff that I'm using. If it's not an 8K resin or it's not 8K capable and I haven't tested it or used it myself, I am going to hesitate in trying to use it. And trust me when I say this, you will get better results when you stop using standard resins. $20 a bottle is cheap, yes. It's great for when you're learning, but I'm even going to kind of veto that a little bit and say that even learning, you really need to experience what better materials are going to work with. Your supports can be leaner. They're going to be stronger. Your tensile strength is usually going to be like double or less. I mean, it might be a little less, but it's going to be better. Your quality, your detail levels are all going to go up, and I think that's a huge plus. You're getting the most out of your printer when you do this. Number 6, trusting pre-support files out of the box. Regardless of who supported them or how long these guys have been in the business, don't ever trust a support file out of the package. Bring it into your slicer of choice. Check to make sure that there are no islands. Now, this really only classifies if you're actually getting like the Chitu box file or the lychee slicer file or the actual file for your slicer, because if you're importing an STL, the problem goes there is that some of the supports themselves will come off at angles and the polygon lines will create islands of their own. Not necessarily an adequate or good way to test for islands, although it can be done that way if you want to pinch. If you really want to check an STL file for islands, you need to have UV tools, and you really need to go layer by layer and make sure that you're not, missing any islands that have not been caught. But this is a huge thing. The reason I say this is because pre-support files were done in a particular format or printer. That printer had a resolution, it had a screen size and all that. It's all part of its, setup. When that file gets supported, the slicer is trying to emulate as best as possible the environment to look at islands and things like that based on the system's resolution, based on all of that. So when you take a file and you support it on one type of printer and then move it to one with either a larger screen, smaller screen, higher resolution, whatever, the islands caught are going to change. Now, I've experimented with this a bunch, and it doesn't always happen. This is not 100% of the time, but there is a good 90% chance that you are going to find this is going to happen. So just don't trust them right out of the box. If you have the option of grabbing a lychee slicer file or a Chitu file, whatever your slicer of choice is, then look at those and just make sure that your printer is not catching any islands on the setup. Because this will make the difference between you having a bad time and a good time. Trust me on this one. Number 7, using the wrong scrapers to clean the vats. And this is a really common one. This actually probably should have been number 1 in my opinion, but I'll show you all the difference here. So most printers come with these. I feel like these are 3D printed anyway. Probably on an FDM. No, they don't have enough layer lines. Sorry, guys. These are the scrapers that most folks will use to remove rather, or clean up the vat. Like if they feel like, stirring or removing, kind of like when it settles on the bottom, you can use this to get the color to mix up better again. What you should be using is something like this. And this is like a silicone baking spatula almost. And this one actually has a little bit of a divot in it, which is why I'm using it as show and tell. You can see they eventually will get aged, and this will start to peel. You can see that there. But when this was brand new, this was a very smooth silicone flexible piece that you can use to, clean up and stir your vat. And it works a lot better than using those plastic scrapers. Those plastic scrapers, I mean, maybe you could use them to scrape ice off your windows, but I wouldn't recommend putting them anywhere near the bottom of your FEP. You're definitely going to poke a hole in it. In the beginning days of my printing time, my printing journey, I believe I did actually poke a hole in one of my vats with one of those things before I realized that's not what you should be using them for. So yeah, don't use those. Throw them away. Really have no need for them. Now, number 8 and number 9 and number 10, I'm going to give you all an example. We're going to jump into the slicer real quick so we can do a little bit of hands-on there for you guys. So hang on just a sec and we'll be right back. All right, we're back and we're taking a look at some models here from Titan Forge because I had these models loaded up anyway. I was playing around with some of them. And these, I'm just going to go over the last 3 common mistakes here. Number 8, not hollowing models that really needed it. So one of the big mistakes that I made early on was not really fully understanding the etiquette of force and what was actually happening when a print was going off. And so I would take something this big and I would just go in here to my prepare tab. I'd slap on a raft because I was told that was the way to do it. And then I would go over here to my heaviest supports and I would just thring on the auto support and blap. And then pop it in the printer and pray. This, of course, is not the best way to handle a print of this size and mass and density. Because look at how little supports. Putting some supports back here, it's peppering them through that. A lot of this is not done. Your islands aren't done yet. You got one single support going all the way up there. That's going to wobble. You're not going to get that to connect very well. But look at the mass. Look at the surface areas are huge. There's no way these supports are going to catch all this and keep it. So one of the things I learned early on was that you can take a model like this and you can hollow it. And you can put holes in it. And now you've created 10 times less the surface area because now all you have is an outline. And we can actually use lighter support technique here. And even if we're using auto supports, let's say. Now, yeah, you'd need to work these up a little bit because this is never going to be, the auto supports are never quite enough. You always need to go through, check your islands, make sure you're doing your perimeters, stuff like that. But just to give you an idea, it's definitely a more adequate support setup. And because the object is going to be lighter, you actually have more of a chance of this working like this than the other one. Although I still don't recommend it because you have a lot of yellow zones here that need to be supported, at least a little bit, around the perimeters and stuff like that. But that's more content for another episode entirely. So number 9 is hollowing models that didn't really need it. So let's say we had that beholder, but he was a lot smaller, right? Now, if we try to hollow that, it'll still hollow for you. You'll still wind up with a hollow body. But the problem here is that at smallest points, like this point, for example, get so small that there's actually a really good chance that this will actually seal. And you won't have any drainage between the body and the lower half stem. Meaning that if you only put a hole down here, more than likely the upper area is going to create a suction cup, which is going to pull this print straight off the build plate if it doesn't have adequate enough supports to prevent that. Also, it's going to make draining this and cleaning it more difficult later, because I mean, even if we were to put, a hole that went the entire distance here, um, see, we can't even make it that big. You got to make it a little smaller. You're still going to have issues where drainage is going to be a problem, because look how small this little tunnel is. That's tiny, and depending on your exposure time and stuff like that, you may actually wind up curing that. So you really don't want to go hollowing on things that are too small. So if you ever make that mistake and you're doing your workflow and you're like, oh, let me hollow this, all you have to do is go back over here and you can simply delete your hollow, and it'll bring the solid model back. Because even though this thing does have a pretty large mass area here, um, there it's not big enough. It's a small model. This is only I'm going to say like a 40 to 45 millimeter model. So it's kind of small. I mean, and this is on a small printer plate. So this is a very small model. Like this one, for example, he's pretty small as well. You wouldn't want to hollow him either. You'd also have issues here hollowing him, because even though he's got a big round head, his legs and feet aren't really that wide, and so you'd wind up having issues where if a drain hole was in the foot, you wouldn't really be able to make the drain holes very wide, and therefore you'd run into issues there. So that's number 8 and number 9, not hollowing models when they need it, or hollowing models that really didn't need it. All I can say is that's going to take a little bit of experience and kind of learning to figure out the best way to do it. And that also brings in number 10, where I mentioned that as you gain more experience, you can use lighter support techniques as you start to learn how to support models better yourself. For example, if we were going to work up this barbarian here, I would start by adding a raft, going into my support module, simply making sure we do an island check first, which only takes a few moments. And then once you have your islands pointed out for you, which obviously is going to be all the areas that are floating, which is everything, you can simply go down to the bottom of the model and you can start working your way from the perimeter front to the front. So for example, I would start here on the back where his island is on his heel. And then I go over to the other foot here. And then I would finish the perimeter on the foot itself. Just like that. And then you can come over and do the other foot. And again, this is going to be where the print starts. So try to make these a little bit more closer together, clustered a little bit, just to give the bottom of the print some nice structure and support. And then from there, we can simply add supports to each one of these islands. You always want to try and place your support near the middle of the island to give it the most balanced supporting. Sometimes the system itself will place them a little bit off center, and that's not the best way to go about it. So as you can see, what you're essentially going to do there is you're going to start putting all your supporting on all your islands. And then once you've done that, you really want to make sure that you cover your perimeters of each one of your objects and shapes. So you want to make sure that your circles have supports going around them. And again, these are small tips, so these aren't really going to do much damage. And then you go around your other areas with perimeters, like this circle over here under the axe. You place all, just make sure every one of these red zones gets covered. Now, of course, you can use the auto, like I said, but it's not going to aim as well as you would yourself. You have a better targeting system than the autopilot on this stuff. So always make sure, if you have the option, if you're not in a total rush, do this yourself, because this part of the process is going to teach you a lot about how to support models. And this is going to teach you a lot of how islands work and how that whole thing is, how islands can really ruin your day if you don't get them properly. And just, keep in mind that every model that you work on is just experience towards learning more on how to support them, how to treat them, how to make sure that they get the best quality print, etc., etc. Um, and you don't have to just number them out like that. You can use trees and other stuff like that. I'm just using the very, very basic um, type of supporting methods here for the sake of this video. And got 4 left. Okay, and there's all of the islands supported, but not the rest of him. He would still need to be generally supported. You would still need to go in here and add some extra supports, like probably on the back of the hair, on each one of these segments here, just to make sure that these yellow zones are well compensated. Anytime you see yellow, if you're working in lychee, it means that essentially this is a good area to place supports. This is anything that is over a particular angle. So the slicer is going to note that, and it's going to say, hey, this is a good spot for supporting because it's at a good angle for it. It also is an angle that means that it's going to be under more stress. So being able to see that and use that to your advantage, that's important. Now, the other thing I want you to notice too is you see this little white line as I'm moving my mouse around here, placing supports. That is the slice. So as you move up and down, you can actually see kind of where the slices are happening. This should help you place your supports as well, because what you can do is you can try to balance them on the perimeter of the slices as they kind of go up and down. That doesn't mean placing supports everywhere, but it does mean placing them in areas that have the yellow zones and trying to place supports as much as you can on the perimeter areas of each part of the model, because the perimeters are the most important aspects of it. You don't have to overfill the middle if you get your perimeter nice and solid, and that's essentially what you want to try and do. And once you're done with that, you can go ahead and go back. You can add your bracings. You can strengthen up all those, and you go ahead and run off to the printer and see if this works. Now, sometimes when you're early on in your print game, I always suggest using auto supports and kind of working your way backwards from that. But lately, I've talked to a few folks that said that kind of was counterproductive for them, and they've recommended not doing that anymore. I personally still think it's a pretty valid way of doing things. You use the auto supports. It gives you an idea of how the system will support the model. Then you can either go back and delete, move, or just completely redo the supporting based on the way you see fit. Once you've been doing this for a while and you have a better understanding of how the supporting systems work, what to support, and what might make it fail and what might not make it fail versus what might make pancakes happen, which is when an object gets flat or warped against the build plate because it didn't have enough support and let go at some point. Now, points like this little round earring, might not have enough support as an island with just one little tiny micro support. So placing 2 there might be necessary in that case. This little one, too, might also need a little assistance. So one of the things you can do is use a tool like UV tools, or you can use the layer slider to go up and down and kind of check to see where the most vulnerable islands are going to be and how you can add additional support to them as you go up and down through the layers. This will help you greatly in reducing pancaking issues because you'll realize the parts that need the extra help. Like maybe, for example, this little chunk right here, or maybe even this one. It really all depends. Sometimes 1 or 2 supports is enough and the piece will do just fine. Sometimes 1 support is not enough and you'll get a pancake or you'll get a partial. And either way, it's annoying because depending on how long you were waiting for that print, that just means you either have to do it again or try to fix it. And honestly, it's usually do it again in my book. And that's pretty much it for the top 10 mistakes, common mistakes, and kind of ways to work around some of them and fix them. Obviously, I don't know if anyone out there has made other mistakes other than these. I know that in my 3D printing journey, some of these were my kind of ahas and oopses, but everyone else has their own way of stumbling upon how they got their workflow that they're using now. So let me know in the comments section below what your biggest moments are in 3D printing, or whether or not you've never made these mistakes. Hey, maybe you're perfect. I don't know. Some people are really good at things just right off the bat. Personally, I make a few mistakes before I get it right. But I think that's pretty common amongst a lot of people who do this kind of thing. Anyway, for those of you that got something out of this, I'm glad that we could share and enlighten you all on some of the mistakes that you might be making in your 3D printing journey. Otherwise, thanks so much for watching, and I really appreciate y'all very, very much. And we'll see you all very soon. Cheers and happy printing.